The idea of this session of writing for the audience is about your relationship with your audience and the role that your relationship plays in engagement with your audience. Engagement with the audience is an interesting concept. In its simplest, most extreme form, does it mean popularity? That is, does engagement mean that the more popular you are, the more engaged your audience is? And does that mean that the more unpopular you are with your audience, the more disengaged your audience is? In that simple extreme form, it might seem that the most popular writer is the writer most engaged with his or her audience, and that writer best fulfills the function of engagement. If this idea of engagement sounds familiar to you, you may remember in this course the first assignment was to analyze and evaluate the validity of a research article about engagement with a specific audience, Generation Z. But I am not going to argue that the idea that the most popular writer is necessarily the one who best fulfills a simple notion of engagement with the audience. I am going to argue the opposite, that the simple extreme is wrong and that idea of engagement is wrong. And you will see how the course textbook supports the idea that I'm proposing. A more mature concept of engagement with an audience can be disruptive. It may seek to change the views of the audience. Consider, for example, the idea of informing an audience. If you are informing an audience, are you reviewing what the audience already knows and confirming the ideas and beliefs of the audience? Or are you telling an audience what it doesn't know? Are you giving an audience information that it does not have? Could the information contradict the wrong knowledge that the audience has? Is informing an audience actually replacing the ignorance of the audience with truthful information? If you accept that idea and that premise, that informing an audience is dispelling the ignorance of an audience, then what happens to the concept of engaging an audience? Does engaging an audience mean being popular by confirming the beliefs of an audience, even if those beliefs are wrong? Or does engaging an audience mean challenging the ignorance of the audience with new, truthful information that it needs? If your audience is composed of members of a particular professional discipline, such as business or science or humanities, is engagement with that professional audience telling that audience what it believes and confirming what the audience believes? Or is it challenging and disrupting the knowledge of that audience with new information? Is the purpose of research to confirm what we already believe? Or is the purpose of research to disrupt what we know with new information? So yes, part of the purpose of research is to confirm what is already believed, because that knowledge is still preliminary and provisional. There may be a strong theory that reflects the consensus of the discipline, but there may also be incomplete data, incomplete research, aspects of the theory that still need to be tested and verified, questions that arise from contradictions in the theory. In that case, the work of research is to fill in the gaps of knowledge in the existing theory and to resolve the contradictions. But the role of the research is not to be deceitful, and it's not to fill in gaps of knowledge with lies and bad research, and it's not to resolve the contradictions using deceit. The work of research in completing a provisional theory is to strengthen the theory honestly or to discover that the theory is wrong and create a new, better theory. As an example of that in science, there's what happened in the replacement of the scientific belief that the sun revolves around the earth. That came with the revolutionary theory of Copernicus in the mid-1500s. That theory of Copernicus was that the earth revolved around the sun. It seemed to be common sense that the sun revolved around the earth. That's what was observed. But when Galileo tried to support the theory of Copernicus empirically and prove it to be true empirically, that the sun revolved around the earth in the early 1600s, he was tried by the Inquisition. He was forced to recant the scientific theory, and he spent the rest of his life under house arrest. The work of research in completing the provisional theory is to strengthen the theory honestly or to discover that the theory is wrong and to create a new, better theory. The groundbreaking work on this model of research and progress in science comes from the 1962 book by Thomas Kuhn, The Structure of Scientific Revolutions. So you can read more about that concept of the progress in science if you want to go to that book. So engagement in a professional audience can be research which tests and validates the existing theory, or research which challenges the existing theory and challenges the beliefs of the audience. You can see that even how you define the term engagement is important. In the third week of this course, in the sessions on critical thinking, I made the point about the importance of the definition of terms. If you don't define the term engagement, you may be appealing to common sense and assumptions about what that term means. But common sense is not reliable. Assumptions are not reliable. If you don't define the term engagement, you may be using hidden assumptions and hidden premises which are wrong, and those premises are leading you astray, or those premises can be different from your audience. If your hidden assumptions are different from the assumptions of the audience, you may be confusing the audience or making it hard for your audience to accept what you say. That leads to a breakdown in communication. Definition of terms is important in communication. Think back to the first assignment in this course, which you analyzed and evaluated. How was the term engagement defined? Was the definition sufficient? Were there hidden assumptions and premises in the definition? Now, think about the second assignment in this course, which is coming due. Are there terms in your analysis that need to be defined? Will you be tempted to rely on hidden assumptions and hidden premises? At this point, I'm proposing a definition and concept of engagement with the audience that opposes common sense and opposes popular notions of engagement. It would also deal with situations where you need to tell an audience what the audience doesn't want to hear, which is one assignment in this course. The assignment is to deliver a message of layoffs to employees and the public. The audience does not want to hear this message. It is a bad news message. So how do you deliver a bad news message that the audience doesn't want to hear? There's a lecture on bad news messages coming in another session. The common sense notion of engagement might be that the most engagement, the best engagement with the audience comes with the highest degree of popularity with the audience and the message. An example of that would be the speech of former U.S. President Donald Trump on January 6th, 2021. And Trump is now on trial in the U.S. Senate for that speech. In that speech, Trump told his audience what his audience believed to be true, which was that Donald Trump lost the election to be reelected as president of the United States because the nasty Democrats had rigged the election and falsified the results. The audience loved the message. The audience was totally engaged with the audience. For months and years before that, the same audience had been fed the same message by Trump and by Fox News. The message was popular, and so the message supported the popularity of Trump and of Fox News. That popularity, that degree of engagement with a specific audience was a source of political power for Trump and a source of revenue for Fox News. The message was popular for a specific audience. The specific audience was fully engaged. And the audience was so engaged that right after Trump's speech on January 6th, it attacked the U.S. Congress and the U.S. Senate. The message that Trump and Fox News gave was highly popular for the specific audience. The audience was fully engaged, but the message was not true. The message got engagement by confirming biases and mistakes in knowledge, rather than being truthful and challenging mistaken knowledge. That is not how progress is made. Progress is not made in science by confirming mistaken beliefs and mistaken knowledge. Progress is not made in government and society by confirming biases and prejudice. Progress is made by disrupting mistaken knowledge, then disrupting mistaken beliefs, and replacing them with better knowledge. In your education, you can learn more when your existing knowledge is disrupted and replaced with better knowledge. You are not really learning if what you already know is being confirmed and your mistaken ideas are not challenged. So now we come to an essential question. Can you engage an audience at the same time you are disrupting the knowledge of the audience? The answer in the text is yes, you can. In fact, the text tells you to disrupt the thinking of your professional audience with better knowledge. If you are confirming what the audience already knows, you can be reassuring and popular. But there may be important consequences if you disrupt the knowledge of your audience with truthful knowledge, provided that you have solid evidence to support that disruption. Your result can be more intriguing if it is disruptive. The disruption, if it has important consequences, may wake your audience out of its slumber. A rational, open-minded audience should be prepared to listen and evaluate what contradicts its thinking. That kind of audience may be engaged by the disruption. And so now the game of wits starts. The game is afoot, as Sherlock Holmes would say. Your thesis statement disrupts a common belief. A rational, open-minded audience should be intrigued. It should be curious. Now you have the attention of the audience. Now you have to prove with solid evidence, that's using critical thinking. Now you have to prove with solid evidence that the disruptive ideas are true while the audience is testing you, trying to find flaws in what you're saying. It would be like a detective novel where the narrative runs against the expectations of the audience and delights the audience by defeating its expectations in a fair and reasonable way. What is the value of a detective novel where the novel just confirms what the audience expects. The text tells you how to persuade and engage your audience in disrupting its knowledge. You introduce the consequences in the knowledge that intrigue the audience. You use the familiar formats of your audience. You use the familiar methodology of your audience. You use the standard of evidence for your audience. You use the standard of reasoning for your audience. You anticipate the questions and points of disagreement with your audience, and you refute the disagreement before your audience expresses it. That is how the text tells you how to persuade the audience to accept disruptive information. For example, suppose the accepted business model is that you can only sell a product or service through a brick and mortar store. The logic is that people will only buy food, clothes, books, and cars if there is a physical building that sells the product and if there are salespeople to help customers. Your disruptive model is that you can increase sales and profits by selling online without a physical store delivered by a delivery service. That disrupts the common sense model of your audience. One person in the audience objects that people want a store and engagement, and people want engagement with salespeople, and the home delivery will increase your costs. So it is a bad idea, and it won't work. It just won't work. Amazon is a model that just won't work. It disrupts the existing business model, and the existing model is right, Amazon is wrong. Or your disruptive model is that you can increase sales and profit through a service without professionals experienced and trained in that service. You can sell services using amateurs. Maybe instead of using experienced travel agents, you will have an online booking site for vacations where instead of a paid travel agent, customers are guided by customer reviews, and the company does not have to pay for the customer reviews, and the customer makes the booking without a travel agent. Or maybe instead of using experienced taxi drivers in fleet taxis, you get amateurs to drive taxis using their own cars. One person in the audience objects that people want experienced travel agents and like the engagement with a real person. And so people won't buy vacations from an online site with customer reviews. Nobody will use a travel site called Expedia. Or the person objecting says that people want experienced drivers in fleet cars, and nobody will use a service called Uber Taxi that uses amateur drivers in their own cars. It just won't work. Uber won't work. It disrupts the existing business model, and the existing model is right. Uber won't work. Well, you recognize that those examples are now ancient history. Amazon, Expedia, and Uber disrupted the old model of business and proved it wrong. So, are all the existing business models permanent and unchanging, or will there be more unexpected disruptive business models in the future? In engaging the audience is confirming the existing knowledge of the audience, the real engagement, or is the real engagement engaging the audience with new knowledge with important consequences that disrupts old ways of thinking? Are rational, open-minded, professional people engaged with ideas that disrupt their thinking, or are they only engaged when they are entertained and diverted? Are rational, open-minded, professional people curious and willing to be challenged in their thinking, provided the challenge gives evidence that they can accept? maybe that's something to think about. Here's something more to think about. Writing for the audience means understanding the needs of the audience in communication. For example, what is the level of education of the audience? What is the level of expertise and knowledge of the audience? What is the language of the audience? What is the experience of the audience? What are the expectations of the audience? But what the audience wants may not be what the audience needs. The audience of Donald Trump may have wanted the message that the election was rigged, but that was not the message that the audience needed. The message that the audience wanted made the audience angry and made it easy to encourage the audience to rebel and take action against its own government. In this situation, the disruptive message would appeal to peacefulness, rationality, and legal due process. But by this point, the audience can be so absorbed in how much propaganda is received over such a long period of time that it's difficult to change minds. What the audience wants may not be what the audience needs. When a patient goes to a doctor for help, should the doctor give the patient what the patient needs or what the patient wants? It is easier to give the patient what the patient wants. And there may be some doctors who do that. The doctor may give the patient a placebo medication that is nothing but makes the patient happy. Or students are taking a course and want to be entertained rather than educated, because entertainment is fun and distracting, but education requires work and effort. Then do you give students the entertainment they want, or do you give students the education they need? Do you entertain the students, or do you help the students to learn? When you write an assignment in a university course, you see your audience as one person, the instructor. You write for the audience. But in a course like this, in professional communication, you are demonstrating that you can write for a larger audience, not just the instructor. The course is about writing for an audience, not about writing for one university professor. It is a basic element of professional writing that you write for the audience you have identified. And in some cases, you do research on your audience. You look at demographics of your audience. Once you identify the audience, that affects what you write and how you write. That is the reason why the course outline says you must identify your intended audience. The information you're writing is not for you, it's for your audience. You want to connect with your reader, and you want to look at how your audience will predictably disagree with you. So the terms and language that you use reflect your knowledge of the audience and supplies the knowledge of the audience, the knowledge the audience lacks. For example, if you're writing for a business audience, you have an idea of the language of this audience, the way this audience thinks, what ideas this audience will accept easily, and that doesn't need much emphasis, and what ideas this audience won't accept easily. And so there needs to be more emphasis. There needs to be more proof. So the audience can be just one person, such as your boss. The audience can be people above you in the hierarchy. The audience can be people below you in the hierarchy. The audience can be people equal to you in the hierarchy. You have to consider all these aspects. You have to know your audience. You have to understand the thinking of your audience. Another point about writing for the audience is that you can't control the audience. That means that the audience is not simply passive. The audience can react to your message in ways you don't intend or interpret your message in ways you don't intend. And that problem in communication has only increased with the technology of the internet. Before the internet, communication was basically one way, and the audience had limited ability to respond basically through letters to the editor. Now the audience can respond quickly on the internet to a large audience, and that response can't be controlled. So the person who creates the message can't control the response of the audience on the internet. And that response can change the reception of the message. This is like the psychology of the traffic jam. Individuals by themselves can make bad decisions which add up to gridlock. One person can decide in Kamloops that it only takes 10 minutes to get anywhere, and so that person leaves for work at 10 minutes to 9 o'clock. If everybody decides the same thing, then there's a traffic jam, and nobody gets to work on time. The same with panic buying during the coronavirus. We saw that there were plenty of supplies, but if everybody decided to stock up on items and get extra items, there was not enough. And so the fear creates what it is afraid will happen. You have panic buying. You have panic behavior. You can't control the reaction. You can't control the behavior of people. So that's an illustration of being unable to control an audience. So for that reason, you need to think a lot more carefully about your communication. You need to think about what could go wrong. You need to think about your assumptions about the audience, because your assumptions may be wrong. If you assume that the audience is rational, the audience may behave irrationally, which is the kind of behavior you get in traffic jams and panic buying. Or a leader or member of the audience can be a renegade, and it only takes one renegade to disrupt a message and change the mind of an audience. Consider one irrational, bad review of a business online. What do you do when that happens? What do you do when you're a business and you get a bad message online, bad review online? We'll examine that later in terms of bad news messaging. For right now, let's end with the thought of what engagement is, how writing for the audience means understanding your audience, how the audience now can respond quicker and in other ways to your message and misinterpret your message. So you need to be so careful and clear that your message will solve these problems in communication before they get started.